a Nobody's Project production. Do you know who said this and in which film? Quote, "We have to end apartheid for one and slow down the nuclear arms race. Stop terrorism and world hunger. We have to promote food and shelter for the homeless and oppose racial discrimination and promote civil rights, whilst also promoting equal rights for women. We have to encourage a return to traditional moral values. Most importantly, we have to promote general social concern and less materialism and help people." End quote. 5 years before Christian Bale starred in his epic 3-part Batman trilogy, he was the lead actor in one of the film industry's most misrepresentative explorations into the corporate world meets mental disorders. The film was based on the 1991 novel by Bret Easton Ellis, but the author believed the book was not able to be made into a film due to its narrative. So, if you guessed Patrick Bateman, American Psycho 2000, then give yourself a point. But American Psycho, for the record, is not a movie about psychopaths. The character played by Christian Bale, Patrick Bateman, turns out by the end of the movie to be psychotic. He not only associates with everyone throughout the movie as an object and people to use for his own benefit, but he also delights in pain, torture, sadism and murder. So not a psychopath, but something worse, like a sadistic psychotic. Go and watch the movie if you have the stomach for it, because not only is it a good portrait of psychopathy up to the point when it gets really dark, it's also a good portrayal of just how full of shit a psychopath really is. Case in point, the opening quote. The quote, however, is a good example of a better conversation, even if it is satirical in nature. But if we now turn to reality, we start finding examples where this better conversation we are looking for just missed the mark and the opportunity sitting right in front of these people was lost. Did they not have the knowledge or the words to extend out this better conversation? Or is there something else going on? Let's look at an example. Andrew Huberman, PhD, is well recognised on the internet and a highly qualified neuroscientist and ophthalmologist who, amongst other activities, hosts the podcast The Huberman Lab. In his initiative, The Huberman Lab, which is not directly related to his studies and research, Andrew explores a range of health and science topics. This podcast has been rated number 1 repeatedly in the health and science categories, and it's well worth a listen if you're into those subjects. One of his standout episodes was on the 9th of September 2024. In this episode, Andrew speaks to Mark Brackett, PhD, who is the founding director of the Yale Center of Emotional Intelligence. Mark has a very compelling story and he approaches his telling of his personal journey with many of his vulnerabilities out front. But at the timestamp of 1 hour, 38 minutes and 40 seconds, Andrew asks Mark, what does he know about any of the brain science of empathy? It was at this point in their discussion that the Too Many Arseholes social project started to intersect with their conversation. Being a neuroscientist, Andrew was well placed to tackle the science behind emotional intelligence, and also, having spent almost 100 minutes leading up to this point, the conversation was well primed to go that next step further. However, to our disappointment, Mark's response was, "I don't know much about that, to be honest." And the conversation fails to go to this next level. Now, this doesn't take anything away from the conversation, and Mark then goes on to explain some of the different types of empathy: cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, and compassionate empathy. And we want to call these out as we will go back to these different types of empathy in a later episode. But core to the Too Many Arseholes social project is better understanding the neuroscience behind social trust and social cohesion. How does the hardware work that supports the software? Let's grab one more example from the podcast world. And why not look at the number 1 podcaster currently, Joe Rogan? In episode 1241 with Sam Harris, published on February the 9th, 2019, Joe and Sam cover a wide range of subjects over the 2 hour and 45 minute conversation. At the 1 hour and 45 minute mark, Sam dives into human behaviour and current psychopathy understanding. In this segment, Sam hypothesizes about pure evil, psychopathy, his words, not ours. being better understood by science so it becomes a disease. He goes one step further by also hypothesizing that if we could better understand the neurology, we may start to see psychopathy as a disease, not a human condition, and it even may be curable by a pill. Sam Harris is a philosopher and a neuroscientist. The suggestion that VENS were potentially linked to socio-emotional behaviour was first made in 2005. So there's only been 14 years since this new knowledge was first discovered. But even now, 20 odd years later, it is still new science and not mainstream yet. Sam Harris makes a great attempt at outlining how better science could help understand and help people with pathological traits. But he doesn't mention VENS or even mirror neurons. Was that information not available to Sam at the time? Or maybe he chose not to go down that path of VEN populations in prefrontal cortices being related to pathological behaviours because it was too new and not yet peer-reviewed. How amazing would that conversation have been if Sam then started explaining to Joe and the 4 million YouTube viewers, as well as the millions of podcast listeners, how the hardware does affect the software, how a person's pathologicalness may be defined by their genes, their early childhood neural development or trauma, abuse or dementia, and how these factors can impact these neural structures and also a person's social capabilities. So let's pick up where they left off, and hopefully we can influence future conversations so that when someone asks, why the fuck did they do that? We are wiser and ready to respond. Too Many Arseholes is a social project looking at the rise of pathological behaviours in our society and the erosion of social trust, creating a better conversation around why this is, and finding a way forward to a greater humanity. This podcast is also part of a larger social project that we want you, the listener, to join in on. Key to this project is bringing together threads from many academic disciplines to create a body of knowledge we can develop with you to help us all with having better conversations around these pathological behaviours in our personal and social circles. Thanks for joining us today for Season 1, Episode 9. Today we are putting it all together and we're going to start practicing having better conversations. As with the social project, we're going to need to set some ground rules, or maybe we'll just call them guidelines around how to approach having these better conversations. Then we'll have a play in a sandpit before switching views to the darker side of pathological people, and we'll put some needed protections and cautions in place to make sure your best efforts don't go foul. And we'll wrap this up with some preparation for next week's last episode in this initial monologue series. And so thanks for joining us and coming along on this journey of reflection and discovery as we attempt to unpack and better understand why there's just too many arseholes. Let's really now start putting this all into practice. Let's start having these better conversations about the people and the world around us. It's going to include the good, the bad, and the ugly in our society. It will also push us to reinterpret some of our own understanding of the world we live in. It's a taboo subject and we don't really have the words required embedded in our current lexicon. But we are ready. We've covered all the main topics the Too Many Arseholes social project wants to start with. And so now is just as good a time as any to start these better conversations. It would be irresponsible for us to say, off you go, see ya, good luck with having better conversations. And so we want to do our due diligence in an area that has none, so that we can get a solid foundation and not set you up for failure or retaliation. Before having these better conversations, all parties in the conversation need to have 3 points of understanding locked down, or at least the concepts well understood. The first point is clearly knowing who our arseholes are and who they aren't. If you haven't listened to episode 2, Then we suggest putting 30 minutes aside to get up to speed on how we play Spot the Arsehole. Point 2 is understanding the concepts, the history, the science, and the language required to have these better conversations. This is all covered at a high level in episodes 3 to 8. So if you're jumping in on this podcast at this point, we suggest going back and listening to all the previous episodes. The third point is understanding who to have these better conversations with and who to not have these conversations with. Who to have these better conversations about and who not to have these better conversations about. It's knowing how to set these better conversations up for success or outcomes and avoiding awkward or retaliatory outcomes. Having these better conversations is a social taboo. When have you ever trotted up to a family member, a friend or a colleague and opened up the conversation with, "So I finally met Barry's family on the weekend. I didn't realise how much of an arsehole he was to his wife and kids. Did you know Jill, his wife, before they got married? I heard she used to be such an outgoing socialite, but now she's seen and not heard and the kids aren't much better. I did a little asking around and his siblings and his parents all seemed like nice people. I did hear though that Barry only recently stopped playing rugby after another head knock. Geez, he's been getting knocked to the head for the last 30 years. I wonder if he or his family realise he's maybe got some serious TBI and he has developed some nasty pathological associations to his family." Imagine if that style of conversation just rolled off the tongue. Just imagine. But we can't expect to go from zero to that level of conversation. If someone in the group thought telling Barry was a good thing, then that may result in conflict. If someone else in the group thought telling Jill was a good idea, then that may result in awkwardness and resistance. So we have to accept that we are at the start of working up to these better conversations, and if we can know the actors, embed the knowledge and correctly select the audience, then we are at least as prepared as we can be to have these better conversations. When taking on something new, we want to have a safe place to play around in and experiment. A sandpit, for example, to steal a word from the IT world. And we can do this quite simply by turning the entire conversation upside down. In the upside down, we can talk about people who do display socially trustworthy behaviours. It is in fact exactly the same conversation, but with no risks. It's hopefully not an uncommon thing to do, to talk to and about people who show these higher socially minded behaviours. It doesn't have to be a boring conversation about ethics, morals, manners or etiquette. It can, however, be about people who make decisions for the greater good of their family, society and humanity. People who don't put themselves first. People who are authentic in their character and can be trusted, accountable and responsible. Recently, there was a small event on the Gold Coast, Australia that shouldn't have made the news, but it did. An act that should be normal day-to-day response from most people, but less common these days. The event, in its simplicity, occurred when a tradie dropped a bundle of cash, around $3,500 Australian dollars, that he had just picked up from a job, and he was on his way home when he accidentally dropped that bundle of cash at a petrol station. A teenage high school student found the cash on the ground, picked it up, and handed it directly to the station attendant and headed on his way. When the tradie got home and noticed his money missing, he panicked and rang the petrol station, where he was notified the cash had in fact been handed in. On any given day, you would have hoped that most people would do this, but as a reflection of our society, this went viral. Not only did the teenager act instinctively and with consideration for the owner of the cash on getting the cash back to him, the tradie then went to great lengths to identify the teenager and say thanks and give him a reward payment and a future job offer. So this is a nice story all round. We know no further background on any of these people involved in the event, but we can clearly see through their decisions and behaviours that neither the teenager nor the tradie, and even the petrol station attendant, acted in a self-centred way. Maintaining a social standard where people can be trusted to hand lost items in, where custodians of lost items can be trusted to get said items back to their owners, and also a society where good acts are rewarded and recognised. A good socially trustworthy act can be found everywhere, from workers on a building site that help push a car that's stalled, to the people who run down the street to get the attention of a stranger who unknowingly dropped their bag. those who act when accidents occur to those that put in the many hours to keep our voluntary organisations working. The world around us is full of small to large acts of kindness, consideration and empathy. We wouldn't have our societies if most of us didn't act this way. So let's talk about that. Before we get into the bad and the ugly, let's talk about the good. People who you can have this better conversation with. To say it goes without saying that you can't have this better conversation with a psychopath goes without saying. And most people with significantly pathological associations or who display pathological traits would also not be able to greatly contribute to these better conversations or understand the nuances. Remember, they don't have the hardware to run the software. So it does go without saying that people with full Venn populations in their prefrontal cortices, people with healthy, higher socially minded brains, and people who can be trusted with the sensitive information shared in these better conversations are ideally the people you want to have these better conversations with. But that's not most people around us, unfortunately. Without any in-depth research, it is unknown what the breakdown of Venn populations across demographic, age, and other human characteristics are. You may find yourself struggling to speak with people in your orbit about the pathological behaviours in your vicinity. This doesn't mean that you are surrounded by psychopaths. It may be culturally or socially frowned on to speak so openly about other people in your community. FYI, that's a pretty toxic culture if you can't speak about these issues, and we will address these toxic cultures and how to influence them back to something a little more humane in a later episode. We structured this podcast as a bit of a litmus test for you also. Although untested, we are wondering if certain people who don't understand this social project intent and concepts are those people who don't have the hardware required to. So not only can you share this podcast with your friends and family to bring them into this better conversation, you can also share this podcast as a way to see who you can have these better conversations with. Ideally, before you try to tackle the heavier, more risky conversations, we would encourage you to have better passive conversations. Conversations that don't include an arsehole or a recipient. Maybe share the podcast with your partner and you can discuss the concepts over dinner. Or you can share the podcast with some work colleagues and have a chat after work Friday night at the pub about the people you've worked with in the past. Or even you could share the podcast with your nerdy friends and relook at some historical events and reinterpret them knowing the pathological and humane actors involved. It's these passive conversations that are important to embedding our understanding of the Too Many Arsehole social projects, themes and nuances. And so take some time, have the passive conversations, and make sure you are ready for when you need to have the active conversations. Okay, so now for the bad and the ugly. Loosely using these terms, we can associate the bad as people who behave pathologically towards someone in a mild or moderate way, but also someone who is probably unaware that they are doing this. The ugly are the significant or completely pathological people. They are usually intelligent, well-resourced, and have a good cognitive emotional intelligence, but no empathetic or compassionate emotional intelligence. They know this and use it to their advantage. But surprisingly, they probably don't realise that they are significantly or completely pathological. This part of the episode is the most sensitive. You really need to know the people that you want to talk to. When you start trying to break down a toxic situation to better understand the people involved and how best to help, the mere fact that you are having these conversations in this current society can be a risk. The information shared in these better conversations can be used for personal gain. So tread carefully as you work out which of those around you can have these better conversations with. And often you may know someone who is very socially trustworthy at home, work, and in the community, but they may have an obscure pathological association. Some common examples are people who just behave pathologically towards people in authority, like doctors and the police. You may find that these people have some specific views that aren't humane or trustworthy, but on the whole, they understand pathological people. It's when you have the ugly people in your orbit, people that are significantly or completely pathological in nature, people who know who they are and approach the world as if it's their personal playground. These are the high-risk situations that you need to put protections in place first for yourself and those joining the conversation. There's no set, tried or tested method for handling very pathological people. At this point of the project, we would prefer to bring in specialists in these areas, as we are not going to pretend to be an authority on the subject of dealing with pathological people. However, as with everything on this project, we are filling conversational gaps. So below are some of the basic tips we went through back in episode 2. The most common answer psychologists give you when asked what you can do when you find yourself or one of your friends are in a pathological association is that you need to walk away. You need to remove yourself or the recipient from the situation as carefully as possible. You cannot reason with an arsehole, and their words cannot be trusted. That sounds good in principle, but it's not applicable across a lot of situations. The best advice we have heard suggested is a slight extension of this response, and that is simply, don't try engaging with them on their behaviour and don't upset them until you are fully across the situation. You have plans to move on, and planning and putting in layers of protection is key to managing a toxic person or a toxic situation. People generally don't like having something taken away from them, and for arseholes, it's doubly so when someone they've been treating pathologically, for whatever personal reason, wants to get out. Now that we've stepped through some of the main themes and ideas we are pulling together to help you have a better conversation with others, we need to prepare to have this better first active conversation. Before you can put it all into words, you will need to practice. So let's hop into the sandpit. Think of a person in your life that you think may be a contender for someone who behaves pathologically towards you, someone who's an arsehole. Don't go off intending to speak with them about these concepts. They won't get it, and most often they will just lie and manipulate the conversation towards their own wants. It's a common red flag that pathological people will mostly try to use words to get the best out of any situation. They'll blame, deny, justify, or quit the conversation. They really do struggle to be proactive. Step back from the personal association you have with that person and start to look at this person's behaviours and decisions across their wider social groups. Remembering that words are cheap and often an arsehole's greatest gift. To be able to see the pathological behaviours for what they are, you need to ignore all their noise. Remember, their behaviours are their behaviours, their decisions are their decisions. Their words are mostly lies, and this is because highly likely they don't give a shit about you. They don't care about you. You are nothing but an object that they can use for their own benefit. It could be that so-called friend, that extended family member, that work colleague or teammate that's always a good laugh but never offers to help, never puts themselves out to help you, and never could be relied on when your shit hits the fan. But you know that if the tables were turned, they would expect you to be there all hands on deck to help them with their problems. That person is an arsehole. Try using the phrase, their problems are my problems, but my problems just aren't their problems. You may find you have many people in your circle that could be contenders. You may find yourself drawn to this character type. You may have a fantastic arsehole radar and are able to avoid these people like the plague. If so, you have an innate superpower we'd love you to share with the project. Another key behaviour that we find is common with people who behave pathologically is their level of inauthenticity. An authentic person is difficult to define. However, if you notice someone behaving differently across different associations, isn't that being inauthentic? How many times do you meet someone outside the normal environment you know them in, let's say the work environment, and they are a completely different person? So the bubble's been popped. Pandora's jar has been opened. And yes, the correct translation is Pandora's jar. And you have had your first better conversation with people around you that you trust. You may have even addressed a pathological association in your orbit. If you've had an active conversation and not just a passive conversation, then well done. You have contributed to starting to push the dial back towards a more humane society. Well done you. But to keep pushing the dial further, we will need to have better conversations, not just about the people around us, but next we need to talk about the people in our community. They may be prominent political leaders, a member of a sports club or religion, a teacher, law enforcement officer, or even someone in the legal system that is known around town to be a bit of a prick. How do you start having better conversations about these pathological people? Well, first make sure you really get to understand the person and their situation. You may find that they are the recipient, not the arsehole. Their public demeanour may be a coping mechanism, not a character trait. There's also the people in your community that are just too nice. If we go back to the PCLR, the revised version of the psychopath checklist from episode 2, glibness and superficial charm, egocentricity and a grandiose sense of self-worth, and also pathological lying and deception are tactics deployed by our ugliest of antisocial community members. This is just a warning that at no stage are we encouraging vigilantes. There are better ways, systems and structures that we already have at our disposal. We just have to refocus how we leverage our society's systems and structures to better identify and handle pathological people impacting on our local communities. But this, more difficult conversation is just a testing ground for society, national and global problems that we have ahead of us. How do you start a conversation about people who behave pathologically within our societies? They are out there, corrupt lawmakers and lawyers, dodgy businessmen or predatory con artists. How do you respond when an antisocial policy is put through your state government? More natural land is given away to corporate greed, and our waterways and clean air are not protected against pollution and other capitalist agendas. But we do need to have these conversations. We've all been pushed into embracing digital communication. Now our emails, phones and socials are all full of spam, malware, people trying to steal our information and identity. Some of our news is curated by wealthy elites like Murdoch and Bezos. We are no longer an attendee at a public event. We are now all consumers. They have taken all the fun out of life, dragged the cost of living through the roof, and have left us with divided societies. Well, we start the conversations at home and in our local communities. It's not a quick fix. This is a generational challenge that will take some time to gain ground, take root, and start to grow. But if we as individuals, as mature adults, understand the importance of raising socially responsible young people, then we can start doing that now. Whether we be parents, uncles or aunties, or even family friends, it takes a community to raise children, and we can get started at tackling some of these intergenerational trauma cycles affecting the next generation. When we wound up the monologue at the end of episode 4, why are there too many arseholes? We put forward that there are just too many arseholes in charge. There are too many arseholes in decision-making positions promoting more arseholes around them, and the humanity that should be evident in our politics, business and institutions is being lost. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is much more troubling than that. In the next and final episode in this initial series of monologues for Season 1, we're going to piggyback off a masterclass in scientific and philosophical communication. In the next episode, we are going to tackle why pathological behaviours and existential risks just can't mix. As Carl Sagan is famous for saying, we have become powerful before we have become wise. How much damage and destruction can pathological behaviours and pathological people rain down on societies across the world where environmental, biotechnology, AI, nuclear science and the cowboy physics experiments exist? The future of us all may be at stake at its extreme. So let's try having a better conversation about that. Thanks again for taking the time to listen in. Today we make the rubber hit the road. Enough of theory. Let's start looking at the practice of having better conversations. But that does come with the risks. So practice, practice, practice. Have passive conversations about pathological behaviours in your community or inner circles, so you can eventually start working up to talking about national and global challenges. Too Many Arseholes is researched, written and produced by Nobody's Project. To put this series together, we have drawn on many sources, publications, books and podcasts. Throughout this series, we will ask you to go and read or listen to an article, book or podcast to accompany our episodes. Check out our show notes for recommendations for upcoming episodes and also for our sources. It is important we acknowledge and promote the people and the work they have published that has inspired this project. And finally, we are always keen to hear from you. Do you have an experience, idea, or insight that you'd love to share with the project? If so, please send an email to contactus@too manyarseholes.com. Visit our social media pages and please feel free to get in contact and have a better conversation with us. To support the project, you can go to our Patreon page where you can get more information on the project and support us. You can also join our Patreon group and get early and ad-free episodes as well as other benefits. You can also like, subscribe and review the podcast to help spread the conversation, and the best way to support us is to share the podcast with your family, friends and colleagues so you can have a better conversation with them. Until we catch up again, give a shit about our planet and just please, don't be an arsehole.